The fluorescent lights of Whitmore University's library cast their usual harsh glow over rows of worn wooden tables where Daniel Matthews sat cataloging returned books with the methodical precision of someone who found comfort in order. At 22, he had the kind of face that people forgot easily, not because it lacked character, but because kindness, real kindness, had become so rare that it rendered him nearly invisible to his peers. "There he goes again," snickered Jake Morrison from across the circulation desk, his voice carrying just loud enough for Daniel to hear. "St. Daniel, savior of overdue books and lost causes." The small group of business majors erupted in laughter, their expensive sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as they leaned against the counter. These were the golden boys of Whitmore, trust fund babies who treated college like an extended vacation, funded by their parents' wealth and connections. Daniel's fingers tightened around the spine of a well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, but he said nothing. He'd learned long ago that responding only fed their appetite for cruelty. Instead, he focused on the task at hand, finding solace in the familiar ritual of organizing knowledge, of creating order from chaos. "Hey, Danny boy," called out Marcus, Chen, Jake's right-hand man in the art of casual torture. "We were just talking about the Autumn Gala next weekend. You know, the event where normal people actually socialize? The Autumn Gala was Whitmore's most prestigious social event, a black-tie affair held in the grand ballroom of the historic Pemberton Hotel. It was where the campus elite gathered to see and be seen, where future CEOs networked with tomorrow's politicians, where fairy tales supposedly came true for those lucky enough to be invited into the inner circle. Daniel had never attended. Men like him weren't meant for such gatherings. "We were wondering," Jake continued, his smile sharp as broken glass, "if you'd ever consider asking someone, you know, stepping outside your comfort zone of books and loneliness." The cruelty in his tone was wrapped in false concern, a technique these boys had perfected over years of privileged cruelty. Daniel felt heat rise in his cheeks, but before he could respond, the heavy library doors swung open with a soft whoosh. She entered like she always did, quietly, almost apologetically, as if afraid her very presence might disturb the sacred silence of the library. Emma Claire Sullivan carried a tower of books that seemed to defy gravity, her slight frame hidden beneath an oversized cardigan that had seen better years. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, secured with what appeared to be a pencil, and her thick-rimmed glasses reflected the harsh fluorescent light. Emma was a ghost on campus, present but unnoticed, intelligent but overlooked. She spent her days in the library's deepest corners, emerging only for classes before disappearing back into her fortress of books and solitude. The other students had labeled her the library hermit, though none of them had ever bothered to learn her name. Jake's eyes lit up with malicious inspiration. "Actually, Danny, we have the perfect suggestion for your gala date." Daniel's stomach dropped. He could see where this was heading, could feel the trap closing around him like a vice. "Emma!" Jake called out, his voice echoing through the library with deliberate loudness. "Emma Sullivan, come here for a second." She froze like a deer caught in headlights, her stack of books wavering dangerously. Every head in the library turned toward her, and Daniel watched as color drained from her face. She adjusted her glasses nervously, a gesture he'd noticed she made whenever she felt exposed. "The guys and I were just talking," Jake continued as she reluctantly approached, her footsteps silent on the carpet. "And we thought Daniel here might want to ask you something." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of every stare in the room. Emma stood there, clutching her books like armor, her green eyes wide behind her glasses. Marcus leaned against the counter, barely containing his laughter. "Go on, Danny. Ask her to the gala. I'm sure she'd love to experience what a real party looks like." The cruelty was breathtaking in its casual efficiency. With just a few words, they'd managed to humiliate both Daniel and Emma, turning what should have been a simple invitation into a public spectacle designed to wound. Daniel looked at Emma, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. Behind those oversized glasses, he saw something that made his chest tighten. Not just embarrassment, but a deep, familiar loneliness that mirrored his own. She was waiting for the punchline, waiting for the moment when the joke would be revealed and she could retreat back into her safe world of books and solitude. But as he stared into those green eyes, something unexpected happened. Instead of seeing the nerdy girl everyone else saw, Daniel glimpsed something else entirely. A spark of intelligence, yes, but also a carefully guarded vulnerability that spoke to the deepest parts of his soul. "Emma," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Would you like to go to the autumn gala with me?" The question hung in the air like a prayer. Jake and Marcus exchanged glances, clearly expecting her to refuse, to run away in embarrassment, to provide them with the entertainment they craved. Emma tilted her head slightly, studying Daniel's face with an intensity that made him feel exposed. For a moment that stretched like eternity, she said nothing. Then, slowly, a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. Mysterious, knowing, and entirely unexpected. "Yes," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I'd like that very much." The silence that followed was different from before, charged with surprise and something that might have been possibility. Jake's confident smirk faltered, and Marcus looked genuinely confused by this turn of events. Daniel felt his heart skip a beat. "Really?" Emma's smile widened just a fraction. "Saturday at 7? "I'll pick you up," Daniel said, then immediately worried he'd overstepped. "I mean, if you'd like me to, that would be lovely," she said, and there was something in her tone that made Daniel wonder if there was more to Emma Sullivan than anyone, including himself, had ever imagined. As she walked away, her stack of books steady despite everything that had just happened, Daniel caught something in her reflection in the glass door, a glint in her eye that suggested this quiet, overlooked girl might just be full of surprises. Jake and his friends left soon after, their entertainment value thoroughly diminished by the unexpected turn of events. But Daniel barely noticed their departure. He was too busy replaying the moment when Emma had smiled at him, too busy wondering what secrets lay hidden behind those oversized glasses and careful walls. He had no idea that in 6 days, his entire world would change forever. Emma Sullivan lived in a small apartment above Henderson's bookshop on Maple Street, a space that perfectly reflected her public persona, cramped, cluttered with books, and utterly unremarkable from the outside. But appearances, as Emma well knew, could be deceiving. As she climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment, her mind raced with the events of the afternoon. She'd known about the bet, of course. In a social ecosystem as small as Whitmore University, rumors spread like wildfire, especially cruel ones. She'd overheard Jake and his friends planning their little joke days ago, had seen the trap being set with military precision. What she hadn't expected was the look in Daniel's eyes when he'd asked her. Not the smug anticipation of a prankster, but something genuine and vulnerable that had caught her completely off guard. Emma set her books down on the kitchen table and moved to the far wall of her living room. To any casual observer, it appeared to be nothing more than a bookshelf filled with dusty classics. But Emma pressed a specific spot on the wood paneling, and a section swung inward, revealing a walk-in closet that was nothing short of spectacular. This was Emma's secret. A carefully curated collection of designer gowns, shoes, and accessories. That would have been at home on any red carpet in Hollywood. Each piece was exquisite, expensive, and completely at odds with the dowdy cardigans and baggy jeans that comprised her public wardrobe. She ran her fingers along the silk and satin, remembering the girl she used to be before tragedy had taught her to hide, before her parents' death in a car accident had left her alone in the world with nothing but a trust fund and a broken heart, before she'd learned that beauty made you a target, that intelligence was safer than attraction, that invisibility was the best armor against a cruel world. But Daniel had seen her. Not the real her, not yet. But he'd seen something worth asking to a dance, something worth taking a chance on. And for the first time in 3 years, Emma felt a familiar flutter of excitement in her chest. She pulled out her phone and dialed, a number she hadn't used in months. Sophia Laurent Styling. This is Sophia speaking. Sophia, it's Emma. Emma Sullivan. The pause on the other end was brief, but telling. Emma? My God, it's been months. I was starting to think you'd sworn off. Beauty forever. Sophia had been Emma's stylist during her brief modeling career in high school, a career cut short by tragedy, but not before Emma had learned the transformative power of the right dress, the perfect hairstyle, the confidence that came with knowing you looked absolutely stunning. I need your help, Emma said, sinking into her reading chair. I have a date. A date? Sophia's voice pitched upward with excitement. Emma, that's wonderful. Tell me everything. As Emma explained the situation, the bet, the invitation, the boy who'd surprised her with his sincerity, Sophia listened with the focused attention of a general planning a military campaign. So you want to show them what they're dealing with? Sophia said when Emma finished. You want to remind the world who you really are. I want to remind myself who I really are, Emma corrected softly. The next few days passed in a blur of secret preparations. Sophia arrived each afternoon with garment bags and makeup cases, transforming Emma's apartment into a high-end salon. They tried on dozens of gowns, experimented with hairstyles, and practiced walking in heels Emma hadn't worn in years. The key, Sophia explained as she worked on Emma's makeup technique, is not to become someone else. It's to reveal the someone you've always been underneath. Emma stood before her full-length mirror, wearing a simple black dress and minimal makeup, but already the transformation was beginning. Her hair, freed from its perpetual messy bun, cascaded in soft waves past her shoulders. Her skin, no longer hidden behind thick glasses, revealed high cheekbones and a delicate bone structure that photographers had once called ethereal. I forgot, she whispered, touching her reflection. I forgot how it felt to be beautiful. You never stopped being beautiful, Sophia said gently. You just forgot how to let it show. On Thursday afternoon, as Emma sat in her usual corner of the library, she found herself watching Daniel. He moved through his work with quiet efficiency, treating each returned book like a treasure, each patron with genuine kindness. She noticed the way he helped an elderly professor find a rare manuscript, the patience he showed with a frustrated freshman, the gentle smile he offered to everyone who crossed his path. For 3 years, Emma had observed the social dynamics of Whitmore. University from the shadows. She'd seen the casual cruelty, the way kindness was mocked and gentleness was seen as weakness. But Daniel was different. His kindness wasn't performative. It was simply who he was, as natural as breathing. As she watched him shelve books in the poetry section, Emma made a decision that surprised even her. She stood up, smoothed down her oversized sweater, and walked over to where he worked. Daniel, she said softly. He turned, startled, and nearly dropped the book in his hands. Up close, she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with old books. Emma, hi, is everything okay? She smiled, the same mysterious smile she'd given him days earlier. I just wanted to thank you. Thank me? For what? For asking me, she said simply. For seeing me when everyone else looks right through me. Daniel's cheeks flushed pink. I should be thanking you for saying yes. I wasn't sure you would. Emma tilted her head, studying his face. Why did you ask me, Daniel? Really? He was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer with the care he gave to everything in his life. Because, he said finally, in all my time working here, I've watched you. Not in a creepy way, he added quickly, making her laugh. But I've noticed things. The way you handle books like they're precious. The way you help other students find research materials without being asked. The way you smile when you think no one's looking. Emma's breath caught in her throat. You're kind, Daniel continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. You're brilliant. I've seen the books you check out, the papers you write, and you're beautiful, Emma, not just on the outside, though you are. But there's something about you that lights up when you think no one's watching. I wanted to be someone you didn't have to hide from. For a moment, Emma couldn't speak. When she finally found her voice, it was barely a whisper. You might be surprised by who I really am, Daniel Matthews. I hope so, he said, his smile warm and genuine. I can't wait to find out. As Emma walked away, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. Not the nervous energy of someone preparing for battle, but the excitement of someone about to reveal their truest self to someone who might actually appreciate it. Saturday was only 2 days away, and Emma Sullivan had a butterfly to become. If you're enjoying this transformation and want to see how the rest of Emma's story unfolds, the stunning revelation, the confrontation, and the romantic climax that will leave you breathless, subscribe for more stories like this that prove sometimes the most beautiful transformations happen when someone finally sees you for who you really are. Saturday evening arrived with the crisp promise of autumn, and Daniel Matthews stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his bow tie for the dozenth time. His reflection stared back at him, neat brown hair combed carefully to one side, his father's vintage tuxedo that fit well enough despite being 30 years old, and eyes that betrayed his nervousness despite his best efforts to appear calm. He'd rented a car for the occasion, a sleek black sedan that felt foreign beneath his hands as he drove through the tree-lined streets toward Emma's address. The Pemberton Hotel loomed in the distance, its windows glowing like golden jewels against the darkening sky, and Daniel's stomach churned with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. What if she'd changed her mind? What if she didn't show up? What if Jake and his friends had been right, and this whole thing was destined to be a disaster? But then he remembered the look in Emma's eyes when she'd thanked him, the mysterious smile that had haunted his thoughts for days, and he felt his courage steady. Whatever happened tonight, at least he'd been brave enough to try. Emma's building was a modest brick structure above a bookshop, exactly the kind of place he'd imagined she might live. As he climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment, Daniel could hear the soft strains of classical music through the door. Vivaldi, he thought, though he wasn't entirely sure. He knocked gently, and the music stopped. Just a minute, came Emma's voice from inside, though it sounded different somehow, clearer, more confident than he was used to hearing. Daniel straightened his tie one final time and waited, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. He heard the soft click of heels on hardwood, the whisper of fabric against skin, and then the door opened. Time stopped. The woman standing before him was Emma. He could see it in her green eyes, in the delicate curve of her smile. But she was also someone entirely new, someone who took his breath away and made him forget every word he'd ever learned. She wore a floor-length gown of silver sequins that caught the hallway light and threw it back in 1,000 tiny stars. The dress hugged her slender frame like liquid mercury, with a deep, plunging neckline that revealed creamy skin he'd never imagined existed beneath her oversized sweaters. A daring slit ran up one side, revealing long, elegant legs, while the back was completely open, held together only by delicate crystal chains that sparkled with her every movement. Her dark hair was styled in a sleek, high ponytail that emphasized the graceful curve of her neck and the delicate line of her collarbone. Her makeup was flawless, but subtle, enhancing rather than masking her natural beauty. And when she smiled, that same mysterious smile he'd been dreaming about, Daniel felt his world tilt on its axis. "Hello, Daniel," she said, and her voice was different too, still soft, but with an underlying confidence that made his pulse quicken. "Emma," he breathed, then cleared his throat and tried again. "You look... you're... wow." She laughed, a sound like silver bells in the evening air. "Is that a good wow or a bad wow?" "Definitely good," he managed, still staring at her in disbelief. "Emma, you're absolutely stunning." A soft blush colored her cheeks, and for a moment, he glimpsed the shy girl he'd grown accustomed to seeing in the library. But then she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and transformed once again into this confident, radiant woman who seemed to own the very air around her. "Shall we go?" she asked, stepping out of her apartment and locking the door behind her with graceful efficiency. As they walked to the car, Daniel found himself stealing glances at her, still unable to quite believe this transformation. The way she moved was different. Not the hurried, apologetic shuffle he was used to, but a confident glide that made her sequined gown shimmer like water in moonlight. "Emma," he said as he opened the car door for her, "can I ask you something?" She paused, one hand on the doorframe, and looked at him with those impossibly green eyes. "Of course." Where did this come from? This, he gestured helplessly, trying to encompass her entire stunning transformation. Emma settled into the passenger seat, her dress pooling around her like liquid silver, and considered her answer carefully. "Sometimes," she said finally, "we hide parts of ourselves to protect them. But tonight feels like a good night to remember who I used to be." As they drove toward the Pemberton Hotel, Emma told him fragments of her story, about her parents, about the modeling career she'd left behind, about the girl she'd been before tragedy had taught her that invisibility was safer than beauty. "I'm sorry," Daniel said when she finished, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "I'm sorry you felt like you had to hide." Emma looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something that made her chest tight with unexpected emotion. "You're different, aren't you, Daniel? From the others, I mean." "I hope so," he said quietly. When they arrived at the Pemberton Hotel, the valet parking area was already crowded with expensive cars and well-dressed couples making their way toward the grand entrance. Daniel felt a familiar flutter of anxiety as he recognized faces from campus. The golden boys and girls who made up Whitmore's social elite, the same people who had spent years making him feel small and invisible. But as he helped Emma out of the car, as he saw the way heads turned and conversations stopped mid-sentence, Daniel felt something he'd never experienced before. Pride. Not in himself, but in the stunning woman on his arm, in the way she carried herself like royalty, in the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from her very skin. They walked up the red carpet together, and Daniel could hear the whispers starting, could see phones coming out to capture this impossible moment. Emma Sullivan, the invisible library girl, the campus hermit, walking into the most exclusive event of the year on the arm of Daniel Matthews, looking like a movie star who had stepped directly off the silver screen. Jake Morrison stood near, the entrance with his usual crowd, his jaw literally hanging open as he watched them approach. Marcus Chen had gone completely pale, while their dates, beautiful in the conventional way, but suddenly seeming ordinary next to Emma's ethereal radiance, whispered furiously among themselves. "Holy shit," Jake breathed, loud enough for half the crowd to hear. "Is that really Emma Sullivan?" Emma heard him, of course. She'd been hearing whispers about herself for years, had learned to let them roll off her like water off stone. But tonight was different. Tonight she lifted her chin higher, tightened her grip on Daniel's arm, and walked past Jake and his friends without so much as a glance in their direction. "Did you see their faces?" Daniel whispered as they entered the ballroom. And Emma could hear the amazement in his voice. "I saw," she said, and her smile was absolutely radiant. "But I was too busy looking at yours." The ballroom was a fairy tale come to life. Crystal chandeliers casting rainbow light across polished marble floors, round tables draped in ivory silk and adorned with towering arrangements of white roses and baby's breath. The entire room seemed to sparkle, but Emma outshone it all, moving through the crowd like a queen among subjects. As they found their table and Daniel pulled out her chair, Emma caught sight of their reflection in one of the mirrored walls. For a moment, she barely recognized herself, not just because of the dress or the hair or the makeup, but because of the way she stood, the confidence in her posture, the light in her eyes. She was remembering piece by piece who she used to be. And for the first time in 3 years, Emma Sullivan felt like she was finally coming home to herself. The night was just beginning, and already it was more magical than either of them had dared to dream. The orchestra began playing as the sun set completely outside the Pemberton's grand windows, casting the ballroom in the warm glow of 1,000 candles. Emma and Daniel sat at their assigned table, thankfully far from Jake's crowd, sharing quiet conversation over dinner that neither of them could later remember tasting. "You keep staring at me," Emma said with amusement, cutting into her salmon with delicate precision. Daniel blushed but didn't look away. "I'm sorry, it's just, I feel like I'm seeing you for the first time. Really seeing you." "And what do you see?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Daniel set down his fork and leaned forward slightly, his brown eyes serious. "I see someone brave. Someone who's been hiding her light under a bushel for reasons I'm only beginning to understand. Someone who makes me want to be braver too." Emma's breath caught. In 3 years of invisibility, no one had ever looked at her the way Daniel was looking at her now. Not with simple attraction, though that was certainly there, but with genuine recognition, as if he was seeing not just her beauty, but the person beneath it. The moment was interrupted by the approach of Sarah Mitchell, one of the university's most prominent socialites, trailing her usual entourage of admirers. "Emma Sullivan," Sarah said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "My goodness, what a transformation. I almost didn't recognize you without your books." Emma smiled serenely, unruffled by the barely concealed malice. "Hello, Sarah. You look lovely tonight." "Where on earth did you find that dress?" Sarah continued, circling Emma's chair like a predator sensing weakness. "It's so bold. Very different from your usual style." "Sometimes change is good," Emma replied, taking a sip of champagne with perfect composure. Daniel watched this exchange with growing tension, recognizing the subtle cruelty beneath Sarah's polite words. He'd seen this kind of social warfare before, had been on the receiving end of it himself, but watching it directed at Emma made something protective and fierce rise in his chest. "I think Emma looks absolutely stunning," he said, his voice carrying more authority than he knew he possessed. "The most beautiful woman in the room, actually." Sarah's smile tightened almost imperceptibly before she retreated with her followers, but not before Emma caught the flash of genuine surprise and something that might have been respect in her eyes. "My knight in shining armor," Emma murmured, as Sarah disappeared into the crowd, but there was nothing mocking in her tone, only warmth. "You didn't need rescuing," Daniel observed. "You handled that perfectly." "I've had practice," Emma said simply, then brightened as the orchestra transitioned into a waltz. "Dance with me?" Daniel's face went pale. "I should probably mention that I'm not much of a dancer." Emma stood and extended her hand, her silver gown catching the candlelight and making her look like something from a dream. "Trust me. On the dance floor, Surrounded by couples who moved with practiced grace, Daniel felt his nervousness spike. But Emma guided him with patient confidence, her hand warm in his, her other resting lightly on his shoulder. "Just feel the music," she whispered, and somehow, impossibly, he did. They moved together slowly at first, Daniel concentrating on not stepping on her feet, but gradually he began to relax into the rhythm. Emma was an exquisite dancer, graceful, intuitive, making him feel more coordinated than he had any right to be. As they spun gently around the floor, other couples began to stop and watch, creating a small clearing around them. "Everyone's staring," Daniel murmured, suddenly self-conscious. "Let them," Emma said, her green eyes fixed on his face. "I have something to tell you, Daniel." Her tone was serious enough to make him focus completely on her words, even as they continued to move in perfect synchronization. "I knew," she said quietly. "About the bet. About Jake and his friends planning this whole thing as a joke." Daniel stopped dancing so abruptly that they nearly collided. "What?" Emma guided him to the edge of the dance floor, away from curious ears. "I overheard them planning it days before you asked me. They wanted to see if the weird library girl would embarrass herself at the gala." Daniel's face flushed with shame and anger. "Emma, I swear to you I didn't know." "I know you didn't," she said, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "That's not why I'm telling you." "Then why?" Emma was quiet for a moment, watching the other couples dance, the light from the chandeliers casting moving shadows across her face. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible above the music. "Because when you asked me, you looked scared, hopeful, real, not like someone pulling a prank, but like someone taking a genuine risk." She turned back to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I said yes because I could see that asking me mattered to you, that I mattered to you." Daniel felt his heart stop and restart. "You do matter to me, more than you know." "Why?" she asked, the single word carrying the weight of 3 years of invisibility, of believing herself forgettable and easily overlooked. Daniel took her hands in both of his, not caring who might be watching. "Because you're kind, without expecting anything in return. Because you treat books like they're treasures, and people like they're precious. Because you have this way of moving through the world that's gentle and strong at the same time. Because when you smile, really smile, not the polite one you wear for everyone else, it's like watching the sun come up." Emma's breath hitched, and a single tear slipped down her cheek, though she was smiling. "And because," Daniel continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction, "in a world full of people trying to be noticed, you've taught me that sometimes the most extraordinary things are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone who knows how to look." For a moment, they stood in perfect stillness while the world danced around them. Then Emma reached up and touched his face with trembling fingers. "Daniel Matthews," she whispered, "you are the most surprising man I've ever met." Before he could respond, she kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise, there in the middle of the dance floor with half of Whitmore University watching. And in that moment, Daniel understood that this wasn't just about a dress or a transformation or proving anything to anyone else. This was about two lonely people finding each other in the most unexpected way possible. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling, and the orchestra was playing something slow and romantic that seemed written just for them. "Shall we finish our dance?" Emma asked. "I thought we were just getting started," Daniel replied, and pulled her back into his arms. Around them, the whispers continued, phones flashed, and the social media posts began that would make this night legendary in Whitmore folklore. But Emma and Daniel noticed none of it. They were too busy falling in love with the truth of each other, too busy discovering that sometimes the most beautiful transformations happen not when you become someone new, but when you finally have the courage to be yourself. The evening had been perfect. Too perfect, Emma should have known. until she excused herself to freshen up in the hotel's ornate ladies' room and found herself face to face with her past. The photo was already circulating on social media by the time she saw it. A grainy, unflattering image from 3 years ago, taken during her awkward freshman orientation week. Greasy hair, ill-fitting clothes, thick glasses, and an expression of overwhelming anxiety. The caption, posted by one of Sarah Mitchell's friends, was particularly cruel. "Cinderella's carriage turns back into a pumpkin. Glow up or give up. Fake it till you make it. Whitmore Truths." Emma stared at her phone screen in the marble-appointed restroom, watching as the likes and comments multiplied with vicious speed. The carefully constructed confidence she'd built over the evening began to crumble like sand. Knew it was too good to be true. Money can't buy class, but apparently it can rent it for one night. Poor Daniel. Imagine finding out your dream girl is just good makeup and designer clothes. Her hands shook as she set the phone down on the marble counter, staring at her reflection in the ornate mirror. The woman looking back at her was still stunning. The dress still perfect, the hair still immaculate, the makeup still flawless. But underneath all of it, Emma felt 17 again, lost and broken and convinced that she was unworthy of love. Having second thoughts, Emma spun around to find Sarah Mitchell standing in the doorway, her expression a mixture of satisfaction and false concern. "I saw the posts," Sarah continued, entering the restroom with the predatory grace of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of social assassination. "Quite the throwback, isn't it? It's funny how people think they can just reinvent themselves overnight." Emma said nothing, but her silence seemed to encourage Sarah to continue. "Don't get me wrong, you look absolutely stunning tonight. Money well spent, really. But we both know this isn't who you really are, don't we? Tomorrow you'll be back in your baggy sweaters and thick glasses, hiding in the library where you belong. And poor Daniel will realize he's been living a fantasy." Each word hit Emma like a physical blow, not because they were necessarily true, but because they echoed every cruel thought she'd had about herself for the past 3 years. Sarah was simply giving voice to Emma's deepest fears. "You're right," Emma said quietly, her voice barely audible above the distant sound of orchestra music. Sarah's eyebrows rose in surprise. She'd clearly expected more of a fight. Emma picked up her small beaded purse from the counter and walked toward the door. "Thank you for reminding me who I really am." As she left the restroom, Emma could hear Sarah's satisfied laughter echoing off the marble walls. The ballroom seemed different. Now, the lights too bright, the music too loud, the laughter too sharp. Everyone seemed to be looking at her, whispering, pointing at the girl who'd thought she could play princess for one night. She found Daniel by their table, his face creased with concern as he scrolled through his own phone. "Emma," he said, standing, immediately when he saw her. "Are you okay? I need to go," she said, not meeting his eyes. "This was a mistake." "What?" "No, Emma, wait!" But she was already moving toward the exit, her silver dress catching the light one final time as she wove through the crowd of curious onlookers. Daniel followed, calling her name, but Emma's only thought was escape from the stares, from the whispers, from the crushing weight of her own exposed vulnerability. She made it to the hotel's grand lobby before Daniel caught up with her, gently catching her arm to stop her flight. "Emma, please, talk to me." She turned to face him, and Daniel's heart broke at the sight of tears threatening to spill from her green eyes. The confidence, the radiance that had transformed her into a fairy tale princess, all of it was gone, leaving behind the frightened, lonely girl he'd glimpsed so many times in the library. "You saw the photo," she said. It wasn't a question. "I saw it," he admitted. And that's who I really am, Daniel. Not this." She gestured to her stunning dress, her perfect hair. That awkward, lonely girl hiding behind books because she's too scared to face the real world. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with the same careful attention he gave to rare manuscripts. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but firm. "You want to know what I see when I look at that photo?" Emma shook her head, but he continued anyway. "I see someone who was brave enough to show up. Someone who was 18 years old and scared and dealing with more than any teenager should have to handle, but who still got out of bed and tried to build a new life. I see someone who survived." He stepped closer, gently taking her hands in his. "And you know what I see when I look at you right now? The same person. Someone who's brave enough to let herself be vulnerable, brave enough to take chances, brave enough to let someone see who she really is underneath all the armor she's built to protect herself." Emma's tears finally spilled over, leaving silver tracks down her cheeks. "But they're right, Daniel. Tomorrow I'll go back to being invisible, Emma, and you'll realize that I'm falling in love with you." Daniel interrupted, his voice carrying across the marble lobby with startling clarity. "Because that's what I'll realize, Emma. Not that you've been pretending to be someone else, but that you've been hiding the most incredible person I've ever met behind baggy sweaters and thick glasses because the world taught you that being extraordinary was dangerous." The lobby had gone quiet around them, other hotel guests and gala attendees stopping to watch this unexpected drama unfold, but Emma barely noticed them. All she could see was Daniel, looking at her with such fierce tenderness that it took her breath away. "The dress is beautiful," Daniel continued, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "The hair, the makeup, all of it is stunning. But do you know what made me fall for you tonight? It was the way you handled Sarah with grace instead of cruelty. The way you were patient with my terrible dancing. The way you trusted me with your story about your parents, about who you used to be. That's not the dress talking, Emma. That's you." From somewhere behind them came the sound of slow applause, and they turned to see an unexpected figure approaching. Professor Margaret Holloway, the university's beloved English literature professor, elegant in deep purple silk. "Forgive me for eavesdropping," Professor Holloway said, her eyes twinkling with warmth. "But I couldn't help but notice the commotion. Mr. Matthews, that was beautifully said." She turned to Emma with a gentle smile. "My dear, I've watched you in my classes for 3 years. Did you know that? You sit in the back corner, never speak unless called upon. But your essays are extraordinary. They show a depth of understanding, a sensitivity to human nature that takes my breath away." Emma stared at her professor in amazement. She'd had no idea Professor Holloway even knew her name. "You wrote once about how literature teaches us that our greatest transformations come not from changing who we are, but from having the courage to reveal who we've always been. Do you remember that?" Emma nodded, unable to speak. "Then perhaps it's time you took your own advice," Professor Holloway said gently. "Both versions of you are real, my dear. The girl who hides in the library and the woman who dances like a dream. The student who loves books and the young lady who can silence a room with her beauty. You don't have to choose between them. You can be both." Before Emma could respond, the professor smiled and glided away, leaving them alone in the suddenly quiet lobby. Daniel squeezed Emma's hands. "She's right, you know. You don't have to choose between being smart and being beautiful, between being careful and being confident. You can be all of it, Emma. You deserve to be all of it." Emma looked up at him. This kind, gentle man who saw her completely and loved her anyway. "What if I don't know how?" "Then we'll figure it out together," he said simply. "But right now, there's something I need to do." Before she could ask what he meant, Daniel was leading her back toward the ballroom, his jaw set with determination. Emma's protest died on her lips as she saw the purpose in his stride. The ballroom fell silent as they entered. all eyes turning toward them with the magnetic pull of impending drama. Jake Morrison and his friends clustered near the bar, smirking, with satisfaction at the chaos they'd helped create. Sarah Mitchell stood with her usual entourage, her expression smug and expectant. Daniel walked directly to the center of the dance floor and, to Emma's shock, gestured for the orchestra to stop playing. In the sudden silence, his voice carried to every corner of the room. "Excuse me, everyone. I'd like to say something." Emma tugged at his arm. "Daniel, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," he said quietly, then raised his voice again. "My name is Daniel Matthews, and I'm here tonight with the most remarkable woman I've ever met." Jake snorted loudly. "Remarkable? At playing dress-up, maybe?" Daniel turned toward him, and Emma was surprised by the steel in his normally gentle brown eyes. "You know what's remarkable, Jake? The fact that Emma knew about your bet days before I asked her out. She knew you were all planning to humiliate her, and she said yes anyway." A murmur ran through the crowd. This was clearly news to most of them. "She said yes," Daniel continued, his voice growing stronger, "because she's brave enough to take chances on people. Because she believes in kindness, even when the world has given her every reason not to. Because she sees the good in others, even when they can't see it in themselves." He turned back to Emma, his expression softening. "You want to know what I saw when I looked at that photo you're all sharing? I saw someone who was hurting but still showed up. Someone who was lost but still tried to find her way. Someone who was broken but refused to let it make her bitter." Emma felt fresh tears threaten, but this time they weren't tears of shame. "And when I look at her tonight," Daniel continued, his voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom, "I don't see a transformation or a makeover or someone pretending to be something she's not. I see Emma Sullivan. Brilliant, kind, beautiful. Emma Sullivan, finally letting herself shine the way she was always meant to." He took her hands again, his eyes never leaving her face. "You are not too much or too little or too anything, Emma. You are exactly who you're supposed to be. And if these people can't see that, then they're the ones missing out, not you." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma stared at Daniel, overwhelmed by the fierce protectiveness in his voice, by the way he'd stood up for her without making her feel small or helpless, by the simple truth in his words. Then, from somewhere, in the crowd, came a single pair of hands clapping. Professor Holloway stepped forward, her applause steady and clear. One by one, others joined her. First the older faculty members, then some of the quieter students, then more and more, until the entire ballroom was filled with the sound of appreciation. Jake and his friends looked deflated. Sarah's smug expression had curdled into embarrassment, and Emma felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight bands of fear and self-doubt that had held her captive for 3 years. "Dance with me," she said to Daniel, her voice clear and strong. "Dance with me like you mean it." This time, when they moved onto the floor, Emma didn't hide. She let herself be graceful, let herself be beautiful, let herself be seen. And as they spun together under the crystal chandeliers, she whispered in Daniel's ear, "Thank you for seeing me, all of me." "Thank you for letting me," he whispered back. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave, Emma realized that something fundamental had changed. Not just in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. She was still the girl who loved books and quiet corners, but she was also the woman who could command a room when she chose to. Both were real, both were her. Walking out of the Pemberton Hotel hand in hand with Daniel, Emma felt the cool autumn air on her skin and smiled. Tomorrow she might choose comfortable sweaters over sequins, glasses over contacts, ponytails over perfect curls. But she would choose them from a place of comfort, not hiding. Because tonight she'd remembered something crucial. She didn't have to transform to be worthy of love. She just had to have the courage to be herself. As they reached Daniel's car, he turned to her one final time. "So what happens now?" Emma smiled, the same mysterious smile that had started this whole incredible journey. "Now we see what happens when the real Emma Sullivan decides to stick around." "I can't wait," Daniel said, and kissed her under the stars. And in that moment, as autumn leaves danced around them and the sounds of the gala faded behind them, Emma Sullivan finally came home to herself, not transformed, but revealed, not changed, but finally, beautifully, completely seen. The girl who had hidden in the shadows had stepped into the light and discovered she'd been luminous all along. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing. We post powerful, real-life stories every day that prove love has the power to help us see ourselves through someone else's eyes. And sometimes that changes everything.